Prim. Fancy seeing you all here. I'm not seeing you, but imagine that I see you. Welcome, everyone, to another week of talking basically movies. Have I talked about a show before? I don't know. But, anyways, welcome everyone to another just casual conversation with me, your friend Carlz. When I try to rethink something I did in Spanish and do it in English. Sort of being thankful for the more structured way that you might think in English, but it's not that much like unstructured sort of deal or business you have between these languages. But certainly, I do feel that English forces you to be more structured. Spanish is more free flowing, which it's kind of like a mind fuck mind. I don't know, but whatever. More than 20 years ago, is it? Perhaps close to that. Before the dumb shit like 40 million people watching Chairs and everything, this small previously horror director called Sam Raimi, who, well, I think he's gone into some, I don't know if he's canceled, but I think he's been through some of those classic famous people shit, was chosen to direct a trilogy of movies based on the hero Spider-Man. Something that I, on my lifetime back then, have never seen. I knew that there was an old Spider-Man movie. Of course, I knew of Spider-Man. Like, show me a kid that doesn't know Spider-Man. But anyways, I have not seen Evil Dead, but I knew of it. I knew it was a cool horror movie. No, I lie. I had seen Evil Dead 1, but I did not relate the name Sam Raimi to it. So I didn't have that many sort of points of reference. But the point is, a long time has passed. The character, the Peter Parker played by Tobey Maguire back then, has appeared on the new Spider-Man, like a sort of like a nod to another universe or anything. But regardless of all of that, I wonder if those movies have any merit looking at them from the standpoint of somebody who knows the future, or if you can even do that. To answer that right away, personally, me, I can't. I can't look at the merits of these movies isolated from whatever is happening now. Mainly for one thing, and it's not because of the movies, either then or now, but for the characters. The characters are what brings all of this together. Spider-Man, Peter Parker, Mary Jane, Harry Osborn, Otto Octavius, whatever, right? So, under that premise, I went and rethought about Sam Raimi's Spider-Mans and tried to sort of find the nuclei of things that I loved about them, because I did love them back then. Well, Spider-Man 3 not so much, but we'll get to that in a moment. And I summarized these two sort of main focus of likiness under this premise of comparing them to the current state of Spider-Man, be it in the mostly in the MCU, but also comic book wise. And I think the first thing I love about this movie is what I call continuity. For Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3, regardless if they were written as that, you can clearly feel a character continuity that has not been repeated ever again. Perhaps a little bit between in MCU's Iron Man. We're talking about superheroes all the time, of course. And this is something really curious, because nowadays we have like a whole universe, like a million of shows and movies. And if you think about it, the topic of continuity, particularly when it pertains to characters, is something that is quite weak. Something that is quite weak. Like, pick any character in the MCU, one that has like at least two movies and a show or something, and the only ones that seems to change at all are the ones that die. You know, for example, um, Scarlet Witch. Spoiler, by the way, like she's gone now. If you take it from Age of Ultron to Doctor Strange, right? That's where she died, and she goes through the show WandaVision and everything. That's a character that's mostly static, stuck on that tragedy of, oh, I don't know who I am. I don't know if my powers are bad or good. They use them to have a story. They use them to tell a particular story, like WandaVision, but they don't change until they die. And when I say change, I mean when she died, she went bad. You know, her circumstances pushed her into being a different character, into being into changing. But if you take another character, for example, Sam Wilson, who is pretty much the same character, even though he went from Falcon to Captain America. Like, there's really no time in these MCU movies to make these characters change and have something of that change being reflected on the characters they are. The stories they are in are always bigger than them. And it's part of how these movies are. Think about Star-Lord from Guardians 1 to Guardians 3. How he discovered his quote-unquote father and everything. Was Star-Lord in 3 too different, or so different from the Star-Lord in 1? Even though going through Avengers and whatever, right? You know, and if we look at Spider-Man, who has already 3 or 4, 5, I mean, even 5 movies, like, he hasn't changed either. You know, everything these characters experience in the movies is based only on the end of the movie, which sort of determines what happens in the next one. But in the it's Homecoming, Far From Home, or whatever, like, in those, it's only between the end and the beginning, but it's really not much movement. And you can say, okay, in Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, that doesn't happen so much as well, but you can get absorbed into it, into the fact of continuity. You can watch Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2, one after the other, and feel that it's just one adventure. And that's the point. It's all about feeling. It's all about this sensation of being part of the character's story. And that is something that where you need to necessarily bring up the comics and bring up being a comic book reader. The As I said in my comic show, you live in these characters' worlds. And one of the things that I dislike about the current MCU and the current culture of superheroes in like movies and shows is that they break the illusion. They break the illusion with contracts, I don't know, actors rumor, like, oh, this one is gonna do this, the contract of this one is gonna expire. Now, like, you have a bunch of clickbaiting articles about the Tatiana, the lady that plays She-Hulk, like she's not gonna come back, or like Mark Ruffalo's politics. They're like, there's a bunch of shit that breaks the illusion. And be it the time it came out, be it how it was written, be it how it was portrayed, the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy does not suffer from that. So, regardless of the motives that made this possible for this trilogy to be like that, regardless of that, that is a credit that you can grant it, you know, or a characteristic that you can give to them. They have continuity. They have a cohesive sort of way of being, and it's something that it needs to be acknowledged and it needs to be appreciated, but because it's never coming back. Not for these characters. It's never coming back. And I always say in my comic show, like, one of the phrases that you can summarize the love for Marvel comic books is like, what is Spider-Man doing this week? He's always gonna be there. He's always gonna exist. He's always gonna have a new story. Even if you don't like the current story, this is another one of my favorite sayings. Even if you don't like the current story, that's okay. There's a next one coming right up. And that is something that movies and shows don't ever achieve. So having had that for the brief space of like 5-6 years, where these three movies existed, is something that you gotta appreciate. And they use that narratively in the movies to create the second aspect that I really liked about those movies, which is characters. In this sense, there are a couple of things that are good and bad at the same time, and they are related with the issue of continuity. The things that are bad, let's get them right out of it. Is that despite the fact that these movies had continuity, this continuity was based on just a couple of characters, and not all of them got the privilege of having that. Mostly the bad guys. It was mostly the bad guys, the one that got these. How can you say it? Why do I keep forgetting that Lofa has that? Dude, brief parenthesis. I just checked this lo-fi. I know that singing part is coming, and I was like, this singing part is not right. It's not here, right? It's later. And there you go, it comes out, but whatever. Continuity fucks up with the right of bad guys to be characters. And this is something that is rather important as well, to compare between the past and the present. In the present, you have disposable enemies, and you have non-disposable enemies. Mysterio can die, but the Vulture can't. Back then, that wasn't the case. Just think about how in Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2, two of Spider-Man's greatest enemies dies. Spoiler. Like 20-year-old spoiler. The Green Goblin and Dr. Octopus, they both die. So, I was talking about continuity. I was talking about the right of these movies to have continuity. I was talking about the right of these movies to create a state of like immersion where you are a part of that universe. But at the same time, the movie itself is kind of like self-aware of its mortality in a way. That is the only way you can explain the fact that those two big baddies die. That is the only way. That is the only way. They knew they were making something that was like a flash, a spot in time. We have 3 movies. Let's tell the stories of some of these characters. But even though these baddies die as they usually did back then, even then, you can tell they respected this character somehow. In the case of Norman, like everybody remembers these scenes because they were not only good, but they made sense. Norman has his psychotic breakdown where he has like the Gollum face and he talks to himself. And these are great scenes and awesome performances, which give you, even if they are disposable enemies, they give you great enemies. Well, at least until Spider-Man 3. The same happens with Otto, which is kind of like an even weirder example because they made him a good guy that goes bad. Even that is like, we can't make a traditional bad Otto Octavius because that would be so kind of like pointless, or it would be less climatic to kill at the end, which was what happened in Spider-Man 3. They give you less important villains, so when they die at the end, talking about Venom, is irrelevant. But anyways, the fact that these bodies are disposable, it's something that we don't see anymore. I don't know. In Wakanda Forever, Namor of course doesn't die. Fantasy Four First Steps, of course. I was gonna say Ultron. Galactus doesn't die. What else? The Red Hulk doesn't die in Captain America: Brave New World. What other latest movies we have? You can tell nowadays which bodies are disposable and which ones aren't. That's just how it goes. But back then, they were plot devices to give you or make you focus on the main characters. And here we have like a sort of like a gray area. Of course, like I said, these are things that I like now. Back then, perhaps it was not. Now I like these disposable bodies being disposable because in the context of these movies, which rely most of their likeness, things to like about them, in their cohesive continuity as a unity of 3 movies. Under that premise, this is something that now I like. Back then, of course, I didn't. Like, how dare you kill fucking William Dafoe? Plus, they kill him like by stabbing him not in the dick, but like as close to the dick you can get. The groin, I guess. But let's finish up with the baddies talking about Spider-Man 3. In Spider-Man 3, you can see like the full reveal of how they worked this. Spider-Man 3 like goes full on the main characters. That's why the baddies are so shitty. Because unlike Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2, Spider-Man 3, either they knew or not that it was the final one. They were like, okay. And this sort of supports the point of being a more character-based trilogy. Because of that, they say like, fuck it, let's just do some crappy bad guys. Which they are. Especially Venom. Sandman is not that bad, but they force feed him into the story by making him the guy that shoots Uncle Ben. Like, this is some sort of like retcon bullshit to make them relevant. But in the end, Spider-Man 3 is not about them. It's about Peter Parker. And even then, you can see how respectful they are of these characters. Like, probably not only one of the best scenes in Spider-Man 3, but probably one of the best scenes in the whole trilogy. The whole trilogy is where the Sandman reconstitutes himself. That scene, that scene has no reason to exist. Why is that scene so cool? Like why? The only explanation to me is that they really care to make a believable character, even if they knew it was disposable. Because they did know. And that's why in the latter half of the movie, the Sandman becomes a bad guy just because. And in the climax of the movie, which is probably the shittiest part of the movie, Venom goes like, "You wanna kill the spider, I wanna kill the spider, let's kill the spider," and the Sandman goes like, "Yeah." Like, that's so stupid. But whatever. That scene where the Sandman reconstitutes himself, he sees the locket with a picture of his daughter, and he tries to cry, but he can't because he's made out of sand. Dude, that is some deep hitting shit right there. That scene is so strange. Like, you feel like it has no reason to exist in a movie like Spider-Man 3, but it does. But anyways, that is just to say, or to try to show how these movies were thinking. How were they thinking their continuity and their character development, which are both of the two of their stronger points. And those points, as I say, these are things that I rescue now. Like looking back to the past from the future. Because that is something that hardly happens now. Being so loose with these characters, especially the enemies. It has even become something that is easily recognizable. Easily. Like, you see characters now in the MCU, and like, you can, like, I don't know, smell miles away. Okay, this guy's gonna die, and it's gonna have no true repercussions. It's not gonna feel as impactful as it did back then. So if you look at the death of the Green Goblin and Dr. Octopus now, I don't think appreciate is the right word, but you cannot like recognize the importance it has as in a narrative point of view for the development of these movies and for the reflection they have on the main characters. So let's talk about the main characters. As I've said, I can see a continuity among them, and I can appreciate that, especially contrasting on how Marvel movies are now. I think I should rewatch the MCU Spider-Mans now, but they feel like, I don't know, they lack something that Sam Raimi did have also, and that is the classic Spider-Man up and down sort of how can you say it, like archetype. So Spider-Man, I mentioned it before in my comic show as well. Spider-Man is a character whose main characteristic is existing in a constant up and down kind of like reality. As a character, he goes up, he's happy, and they bring him down. That's how he works. His life is tragedy. But that's what makes him Spider-Man. He always overcomes. And that is something that Sam Raimi's Spider-Man and Peter Parker could not really get. One thing that you can say about Tobey Maguire's Peter Parker or Sam Raimi's Spider-Man is that he's pathetic as fuck. And he's not funny. Which is one of the main characteristics of Spider-Man. Spider-Man uses humor as safety method. Like what do they call that? That's a classic like psychology thing. Like he escapes reality by making jokes. Right? I don't think Tobey Maguire Spider-Man tells one joke in 3 movies. I mean, he becomes a joke in 3, but that's not neither here or there. Yeah, that's. But he doesn't say any jokes. He's in a constant down mood. He never goes up. This doesn't impede the character from developing from down the slope. You know, if you think about it, Bully Maguire, the emo version, brought by apparently the symbiote. Like, you gotta make a parenthesis and say like, did the symbiote did that? The appearance of the symbiote in Spider-Man 3 is one of the more like random casual things that could ever happen. Like it just arrives there and like if you didn't know anything about the comics or anything, that must have been really stupid. Like, what do you mean he's like now mean or like a bully because he has that black thing that he doesn't even wear all the time? Like, it was so strange. But then again, as I've been trying to say with this issue of continuity and with Peter Parker, it made sense. It made sense because we had a Peter Parker that was always down, always pathetic, and as all of us that have experienced being pathetic in life, all of us that has the emo vibe somehow in us, we know how that works. You get to a point of your pathetic life where you go like, fuck it, life sucks. Let's go emo. So Bully Maguire has sort of like makes sense in as part of this continuity, and not only that, as I said, the fact that the Goblin and Octopus died just shows you that baddies, and that includes the symbiote as part of a plot device, are disposable. So it doesn't really matter if it was the suit, like it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. It's disposable. It's a plot device. But it does pushes the character somewhere. The other main character, because I'm not counting Harry, is Mary Jane. And Mary Jane has a way more developed and kind of like nuanced existence throughout these 3 movies. It's really good how they did her, actually. And he captures way more of the comic book Mary Jane spirit than the current one did. I have nothing against Zendaya's Mary Jane at all, but it's a character that doesn't have the chance to be a character in these huge ass movies with like fucking Iron Man and like whatever, like multiverse, like blah blah blah. Like, they don't really have the time. But here they do, and it's something that is really fun to see. And even if you see these movies today, you can see it. They have quiet moments between Peter Parker and Mary Jane that are so real, so humane. And you can really tell they're not talking about multiverse bullshit. They're just talking about being 2 teenagers, quote unquote teenagers, like these old farts, the plain teenagers, just being teenagers and like being unsure of whatever is going on to their lives. And this is all thanks to continuity and character. Having that scene in Spider-Man, but was it 2 or 3, where she goes like, "Yeah, but do you love me?" And he goes like, "I do not." The point is, these characters, these movies had this chance to make something special, and in their own way, they did so. Even watching Spider-Man, this 1, 2, 3, um, it gave me like it triggered me and made me think about Ultimate Spider-Man. Well, now it's almost done. The comic book from the Ultimate Universe by Jonathan Hickman. It was one of the most uh, awarded superhero books of last year. Like critically acclaimed, everybody loved it, including me. And what did we see in Ultimate Spider-Man? We saw this concentrated, sort of like an espresso coffee, right? The one that drips and they give you like. It was a concentrated shot of Spider-Man, his drama, his humor, his family issues, um, how his existence, aka the plot of the comic, affected him. Well, in this case, it wasn't Uncle Ben, it was Aunt May. Like how everything. Ultimate Spider-Man was basically that. A concentrated, pure Spider-Man story with no attachments. Sort of how Sam Raimi Spider-Mans are that Spider-Man without all the attachment that the current one has. You see my point? You can see the correlation there, how we crave for this character more than almost any other one. We crave this situational Spider-Man that is just him, like being a struggling teenager, like under the weight of massive responsibility, dealing with issues. Well, in his case, are super baddies, but dealing with issues that he can't really handle. In the case of Ultimate Spider-Man, the comic, he literally didn't have the means to. Because his powers got taken away from the maker, or by the maker. So we see how we crave. I said one of my favorite saying is like, what is Spider-Man doing this week? And that has to do with that. That has to do with that we crave this character above everything because I don't know, because we enjoy his pathetic existence. Is probably one of the most relatable pathetic existences. That's why he is so big from the beginning. Marvel has come to like make many characters like that over the years, making them more relatable, either by a personal means, like for example making Iron Man an alcoholic. This is an old thing, but making his alcoholism part of his existence, but still he's way too big. Or for example Captain America, how they made him relatable was making him face modern day America's problems, which is, by the way, one of the strongest characteristic of the current Captain America book, which, if you like the character, you should all be reading. They always do that, but in the end, these characters go off to space and fight the big battles, and alongside those lines, you always lose them. Or Captain Marvel, when okay, how can I forget her name? Oh my God, brain fog. Kelly Sue. When Kelly Sue remade Captain Marvel, the strength of her run was that making Carol Danvers a more relatable character. Not only a cartoon of a woman. Like there were many instances during the Miss Marvel times where like, oh, her vulnerability was just, oh, I'm a woman. Like it's either love or like abuse. Which are true vulnerable elements of womanhood. Pardon me, a random bald guy, for talking about womanhood, but those are issues that women face. But that are not they. If you face them with a character that doesn't have enough layers to deal with it, it looks like a caricature. But back to Spider-Man. Spider-Man has always been that character. because for a stroke of genius or something, they tapped into the main basis of being a teenager, just being a pathetic loser. Yeah. But even if your uncle didn't die or anything, it wasn't shot or anything, you always have, as a teenager, a big power and a big responsibility, because you're sort of like the future, and we see that now, in politics and in reality of our current state of affairs, man. Like, all of this shit that's going down with these neo-fascist movements, and this is all brought by all farts, like that sort of divided the world decades ago. And who has the biggest responsibility? I don't want to like kick this responsibility down to the newer generations, but it's true. It's up to them. They have the big power and the big responsibility to change the future, man. Like, we and I'm not gonna just say I'm that old, but like, people that we like, you get fucking tired, man. Like, you try to do that shit when you're a teenager, and then you're an adult, and like, I don't want to break any kid that are listening to my words. I don't want to break the bubble, but like, you eventually bend the knee and feel as pathetic as always. And I guess that's when you become like Norman or Otto, and you just die, right? You go from being Peter Parker to being Norman, and like, then you get swollen, yeah, swole. Wait, yeah, by reality. But anyways, let's finish up this shit. I went into a tangent about big power and big responsibility. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man's movies are great movies because they were allowed to be. They were allowed by simpler times to be great movies. They ain't perfect, of course, but it's easy to understand how, especially when the movies start like closing, or like when they start like closing shop with Spider-Man 3, you can understand why Spider-Man 3 is how it is. You can understand why the symbiote is not so well built. You can understand the cheesiness about it. You can understand the disposable nature of the bodies. The only thing that perhaps you can't sort of complain about is the CGI. The CGI, of course, is awfully dated, like terribly dated. But even that small thing that is easily criticizable, it's not something that the future is perfect in that sense. Marvel has put out some really ugly ass looking movies. We're talking about 20 years apart of CGI, and then you get like fucking Secret Invasion or Ant-Man Quantumania, and like, you can't possibly say that these were like technologically impaired situations for these movies. They have the means, they have the technology, and they still fuck up. So even the CGI aspect of it can be a little bit relative when you make something relative, right? You make it relative because it's not necessarily bad because they didn't have the means. Having the means doesn't really mean that you're gonna do it perfectly. But anyways, so they are great movies. We have to be thankful for their existence because they show us an alternative reality to what we have now. And like in the end, we need to appreciate these movies because, as I said before, this reality is never ever coming back. It's not. Try to imagine. Try to even imagine a reality where like Marvel movies are not dime a dozen, or like you don't have like, well, now we have less than we used to, thankfully. But think about of a time where like you don't have like Instagram news stories about who's gonna be the new what, or like what movie is coming up, like when is Spider-Man coming. Like, imagine a reality where that isn't the case. I dare you, because we can't. So let's use Sam Raimi Spider-Man to have a good contrast of how would you make and write these movies, these stories, and these characters on a different reality, appreciate them because of that, and try to rescue or learn from them. Learn from them. Keep them in mind and realize that there are things that you can do in terms of narration, in terms of character development, that you should improve. They were limited by their 3 movies length to make a cohesive story and to use the baddies in a certain way and make them recyclable or like disposable. They were forced to do that, but you are not forced to do that. You can do more, and Marvel should do more. And sometimes we just accept some mediocre shit because, as I said before, that's our reality now. We exist in a world of infinite and never-ending superhero shit. As I said before as well, that's what I like about the comics. But sadly, it just doesn't work the same in live action. There are way too many logistics that has nothing to do with story, character, or creativity that just hinders the whole process in the live action side. But anyways, keep them in mind, and hopefully you can use whatever you learn from them to make your new Spider-Man better. Let's see what they do with Spider-Man, and let's see what Marvel is doing now. Actually, the whole Wonder Man series is coming out soon, and the reviews are crazy good. So I guess after talking about Spider-Man and Marvel, I guess I'll have to do that. Watch Wonder Man and see how wonderful it is. I do not promise that my new video is gonna be about Wonder Man, because I don't know if I will have the time to binge watch the whole thing when it comes out this week. You know? But anyways, thank you all for listening to another conversation. I hope you all remember Sam Raimi's Spider-Man's movies with love. I surely didn't before. Like, Spider-Man 3 is just so absurd, and even watching it now is cringy as fuck. But I rescue so many things about it now. You know? Especially Peter and Mary Jane. Peter and Mary Jane are really well done. Well, most of it. Not when they're when he's like dancing and shit. But anyways, hope everyone has a great week and with great power. Nah, I'm not gonna say that shit. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.